Hope that you can hear me okay. I'm here in South Korea, preparing to fly to India tomorrow to start the 3 month Rains Retreat program. Um, I've had a wonderful time here in South Korea, and I've had the opportunity to uh, train with one of the well known Korean Zen masters here in the country, Poha Sunim. I've shared some of his works before, someone I've been following for a while, and you can actually find some of his talks that I think are very insightful by searching on YouTube for Pao Ha Sunim, Sunim. And in the spirit of that, I've come across this wonderful Korean Zen master, Gyeongheo. And we're going to read today and explore together today some of these very profound and wonderful Zen Buddhist teachings from Zen master Gyeongheo from a text entitled The Collected Writings of Gyeongheo that was published and translated by the Jogi order of Zen Buddhism here in South Korea. So before we begin, we can offer a little bit of a chant to bring up a sense of reverence and depth for this wonderful opportunity to hear the Dhamma. Okay, so welcome to join your hands together with me and be here. The Dharma is deep and lovely. We now have a chance to hear, study, and practice it. We vow to realize its true meaning. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Let's get right into it. The cry of a mud ox. The first thing a practitioner should remember is how fast this fleeting life goes by, and how grave is the matter of birth and death. So simple and direct teaching, right? We can get very caught up in our stories and our judgments and our worries and petty disputes or whatever might come up in our mind, but realizing the gravity of birth and death, that truly, really, any moment you can die. Um, so the Zen master here pointing to this. An old master said, "It is hard to preserve tomorrow what I am today." Hence, one should always keep in mind not to be idle and to maintain quietude without meddling in worldly affairs. So, really abiding in awareness, abiding in presence, and not getting so caught up, not getting so worked up in the complicated appearances of life, the complicated situations in life, but to realize the gravity of birth and death, to maintain quietude and to not be idle, right? Practice seriously, to take this practice seriously. If the mind and the objects are disturbed by their interaction and time is wasted, as if a furious bushfire, they not only hamper meditation practice, but increase bad karmic consequences as well. Okay, I am doing well, I'm doing okay. Continuing, right? We all have to continue. very good Zen master once told me, when we do like even an intensive retreat together, even we're all staying in the same place, and we're meditating together. In a real true sense, what we're practicing is to be alone together. So as much as we keep on this path, we are practicing alone together without needing to talk about it or think about it. So let's listen to this one again. And this is the cry of a mud ox from the collected writings of Gyeongheo, which is one of the great Korean Zen masters here in South Korea. If the mind and the objective realms, so the kind of worldly realms, the world of form, the world of the mind, the world of the body, the world of names and materials, if the mind and the objective realms are disturbed, this can also be interactions with other people, social situations, etc. If the mind and the objective realms are disturbed by their interaction, and time is wasted as if a furious bushfire, they not only hamper meditation practice, but increase bad karmic consequences as well. So, what it's saying here is as we grasp onto mental formations, as we get involved with, all of these objective truths that we encounter in our life, right? Oh, I made a mistake, or I made the right decision, or I got this great job, or my partner feels this way, or all these kinds of things that come up by our interaction with this and by the time wasted, right, in this grasping, in this getting lost in convolution, right, getting lost in the complicated thinking or seeing what is impermanent as permanent and then being binded by it. These involvements and these disturbances not only hamper our meditation practice, so our capacity to abide in natural awareness or to abide in true freedom, but they also increase bad karmic consequences as well. So it's not just our bad deeds or our unskillful actions that create a negative consequence, but it's also this grasping itself, this involvement itself, um, being disturbed as we encounter the world. This also creates bad karmic consequences through our wasted time. The most important thing is to maintain the quietude of the mind. By keeping the mind free from illusion and preserving the purity of the mind of wisdom. So what does that mean to you, right? To truly keep the mind free from illusions. So what kind of illusions do we most often deal with? We deal with the illusions of someone, someone else, or the someone that you identify with, some place, right? Some environment, some situation, some experience that grasping onto, holding onto. And really, we don't try to hold on to things that are impermanent. It's kind of a oxymoron or a catch-22 to do that. Impermanent. You wouldn't buy into impermanent. So it's pointing to that not grasping, right? Don't grasp. Don't cling onto impermanent phenomena. When we cling onto impermanent phenomena, ideas, stories, names, people, places, situations, experiences, when we cling on to these, let's say, ideas, we create an identity around our judgments or our like or dislike, our preferences about those ideas. We allow illusion to root itself in the mind. The most important thing is to maintain the quietude of the mind. So, how do we maintain the quietude of the mind? Well, I would say, how do we maintain the wetness of water or the wetness of the ocean? It's natural to be that way. The mind is natural not to think. The mind is natural not to chase after or try to avoid. It's like not doing anything is not complicated, or stillness is you don't need to do anything to be still. So we may find that if we're kind of doing all this, uh, do we have some connection issues, friends? Do we have any connection issues? Please do let me know. So we don't need to do anything to be still. The water doesn't need to do anything to be wet. The moon doesn't need to do anything to be the moon. There's a profundity in not doing anything. But because we have, in some sense, not just in this life, but in many past lives, right? Not just in this moment, which we can really um, take responsibility for, but also in many past moments, we've broken precept, or we've acted out of greed, or we have not been particularly generous with ourselves. Right? Generosity isn't really about others or ourselves, but in the realm of doing actions of generosity, it's not about others. It's also about ourselves. To be generous, to be kind, and generosity kind of starts with ourselves. So the most important thing is to maintain the quietude of the mind by keeping the mind free from illusion and preserving the purity of the mind of wisdom. Preserve and maintain what is already. So, what is already? If you look with the eyes, just looking, the eyes looking, the ears hearing, the breath breathing, the body being, preserving and maintaining the quietude and purity of the mind of wisdom, natural mind. Everything arises from the mind. Very fundamental Buddhist teaching. Everything arises from the mind. And it arises from the mind most accurately, right? In terms of someone or some place or some situation, it arises from the mind of nowness. So hell in nowness, which where else would hell be? Heaven for someone, where else could it be but in the nowness of this moment, right? Everything arises from the mind. When we understand, when we adopt this kind of perspective, we can see how important it is to maintain the quietude of the mind, to preserve the purity of the mind of wisdom, rather than to taint it or to complicate it or to get in some kind of fight, right? Some kind of argument. Everything arises from the mind. One will be born in heaven if one performs good actions, and would fall into hell if one performs bad actions. One would be born a fierce animal if one is violent. One would be born an earthworm or an insect if one is ignorant. And one would be born a butterfly if one is light-headed. these are the very, very direct teachings of Buddhism on rebirth, or the cause and effect as it relates to the appearance of someone, the appearance of a self that is born because of ignorance. You could also say because of grasping. Now, we can take it in two ways. We can take it in the way of, after me, this self, this body, this life, this story, after this story ends, that there will be a new story. And maybe I'll be a squirrel in hell, or I'll be a butterfly in heaven. Or we can take it from the side that moment by moment, everything arises from mind. And if one performs good actions, heaven will arise from the mind. If one performs bad actions, hell will arise from the mind. Now, as an educated people, or as a people who have been raised in some degree of technological, a kind of wealth of technological development, we can look at the other side of, of Buddhist rebirth, and we can say, well, that is lesser. But actually, neither is higher or lower, because both of these views are stemming from the ignorance that leads to rebirth. So in Buddhism, there is enlightenment and there's heaven and hell, but heaven and hell are still cycling in rebirth. And Buddhism is about breaking out of the wrong view that you are someone, for example. Buddhism teaches that you are not someone, and also that I am not someone. But until we can, let's say, elevate ourselves or break out from the trap that we are someone, heaven and hell, in whatever way you want to take it, are still cycling in rebirth. Still something we have to accept and deal with. And in the midst of dealing with that, it's more important that we take responsibility for our path rather than making judgments about the others. And I know that's tough, because there's a little bit of kind of an addiction to judgments. Not someone cannot cling to anything, but someone can cling to someone or not someone. Does that make sense, Kane? So we're not talking about someone being able to cling to rebirth, or someone being able to cling to no rebirth. We're talking about not clinging, not someone not clinging. And that's to break the cycle of rebirth, to not be ignorant anymore, to taste the fruit of the path. Hence, an old master said, "The difference of thinking decides the myriad outcomes." If one can keep the mind like pure empty space, by emptying one's mind, free from every delusion and disturbance, there would be no room for the cycle of birth and death, no room for either wisdom or enlightenment, no room for good or bad, no room for bad karmic actions arising from grasping. If one can maintain purity from the top of the head to the bottom of the sole of the foot, one would not be dragged around by a sluggish life. One would not be hampered by birth and death. One would not even be obsessed with thoughts about the Buddha and the patriarchs. So this kind of enlightenment that we talk about in Buddhism is a true freedom. It's not another version of identity. That's why there are so many problems when someone, right, let's say you are someone, let's say I am someone, That's the problem when someone wants to become enlightened, because someone cannot become enlightened. Not someone is along the lines of enlightenment. Because for someone to exist, for some place to exist, for some situation to exist, for some experience to exist, there needs to be grasping. When there's no grasping, there's so much spaciousness that grasping cannot exist in the mind. There's no room for grasping. There's no room for wisdom or enlightenment. There's no room for good and bad, because all the room is full of spaciousness, of not someone, of not some place, of not some situation, of not some experience. Is there a self? There is no self separate from everything else. So, what is that which you call a self that is separate from everything? It's a kind of impossibility. It's a kind of, actually, a logical fallacy. It's a break in reasoning. And so in Buddhism, it's important that we don't get stuck in the details. We don't get stuck in the complicated thinking, and instead we turn towards a direct experiencing. The Buddha teaches us, for example, to train the mind in such a way. Buddhism is a kind of mind training, more than it's a religion or a philosophy or a culture. It's a kind of mind training. And even more than that, we can say it's nothing at all. And what is nothing at all? So we have to work on, we have to try, we have to use the power of detachment. We have to use the power of not grasping, not clinging, not attaching. So when the view of someone, when the view of some place, when the view of some situation comes up, to detach from that. In the same way that when we take poison or we eat a food with a poisoning in it, we throw up. We get rid of that, okay? We let go of that. And it's not that Buddhism is about control, because this notion that we can control others, this notion that we can condemn others, is not really important in Buddhism. Actually, it's the opposite. We stop trying to condemn others. We stop trying to control others. We stop trying to judge others. And when that energy comes up, maybe it's some adrenaline or some interest, some curiosity, the Buddhist teachings are really there to help us turn the mind around, to examine our own mind. So we stop putting the responsibility on taming our mind or maintaining the purity of our mind or uh, preserving the quietude of the mind. We stop putting that responsibility onto some person, some place, some situation. And right at that moment, right at this moment, we take that responsibility onto ourselves. Right now, to train as the Buddha taught, rather than to, be a Buddha man or a Bible man. Maybe not a very well-known reference, but If one can keep the mind like pure empty space, by emptying one's mind, free from every delusion and disturbance, there would be no room for the cycle of birth and death, no room for either wisdom or enlightenment, no room for good or bad, no room for bad karmic actions arising from grasping. If one can maintain purity from the top of the head to the bottom of the soul, one would not be dragged around by a sluggish life. One would not be hampered by birth and death. One would not even be obsessed with thoughts about the Buddha and the patriarchs. Okay? So this teaching here is very, very clear about how we practice and how we train the mind. If one can keep the mind like pure empty space, and this pure empty space is not a passivity. It is a sharper blade than Genghis Khan's. It is a um, wider eye than the Hubble telescope. It is a deeper intelligence than the most advanced artificial intelligence. It's humbling. And the more that we walk the path and take it seriously, and taking it seriously means we have to have an experience of loss. We have to have an experience, in Buddhism we call a holy messenger event, or a practice that supports us to kind of invoke and be connected with these holy messengers of impermanence, no self, and suffering, so that we will realize the utmost importance of taking on this path and the utmost importance of mindfulness and detachment, renunciation, sacrifice, putting down what you pick up. And there's a lot of different ways to instruct about this. We've talked a little bit about childism in this community before, which is kind of bringing awareness to the systematic prejudice and discrimination against children. There's a very clear writing in this, one of the texts we were reading about childism, a kind of a seminal work concerned with this massive difference between hitting a child to make them submit to you, or even hitting a child to keep them from going out into the street and getting hit by a car. And we may be very surprised about how serious this teaching is, how serious this path is, concerned with if one can keep the mind like pure empty space, by emptying one's mind, free from every delusion and disturbance. So having a mind that does not have complicated thoughts. Okay? A mind that is not grasping onto someone, some situation, some experience, some place, some time. None of it. And when we encounter teachings like this, what I've found through, through my sacrifice and my very, at least for me, it was very serious. Maybe for other people it wouldn't be, but living at monasteries, and when I was 20 years old and kind of going through mental health crisis, making this decision to go and live at a Buddhist temple, a Zen meditation temple for a 1 year intensive training program, and then these 10 years after that, regularly attending intensive retreats, and then eventually ordaining and becoming a monk, so that this is my full time, my life is all about this. But when we hear teachings like this, when I hear teachings like this, if one can keep the mind like pure empty space, by emptying one's mind, free from every delusion and disturbance, no complicated thoughts, period. And it's a little bit weird because when, for example, when I first started, doing intensive meditation retreats in 2014, living at the Zen Center, during these retreats, I mean, and during talks, you couldn't speak. You had to sit in a certain way. You had to wear certain kinds of clothes. I mean, every thought at that time, every thought, every opinion, every judgment, every story that I had about myself or that environment was boilerplate, invalid. It was not to be spoken, not to use words. And this wasn't forced upon me, but this was the context of the training that I was willing to enter into, that I consented to go into that kind of training. So when I hear these words, it's a deep swell of reverence and heart and depth that is very, very precious to me, puts me almost in a place of awe. And I'm a fan of a teacher named Jim Newman, and he's, I think, kind of like an Advaita Vedanta teacher, something like that. Maybe he wouldn't call himself that, but one of the really interesting ideas that I picked up from him, because, so a little bit of background information in Buddhism, there's four stages of enlightenment. So the first stage is something called Sotapanna, and it's kind of like the doorway to really being on the path, really being, you got in the door, you're flowing upstream, you've entered the stream enterer. And one of these primary aspects of that status or that entry point, that realization, is no self. You no longer hold the self view, or the self view vanishes. There's no self view there. There's no someone view. And so that the body and mind of a stream enterer, let's say, does not have a capacity to believe that that body and mind is someone, or that the body and mind of someone else is someone, because they have attained this right view of no self. So this teacher, Jim Newman, and I do recommend you can look him up on YouTube. He talks about how meetings like this, because this is some of the real profound Zen Buddhist teachings, and also what he does, these kind of meetings where he tries to guide people to right view, or the view of not someone, or the view that, all of this is already nothing, and it never happened, and it's not happening now, etc. That kind of guidance, so like that, the guidance to realizing that is the most dangerous thing to the grasping, to the self, to the someone, right? Because the someone or the self doesn't want to die, it wants to continue, wants to become, right? This someone wants to become someone who has more pleasure, more happiness, more peace, more freedom. So let's continue. If one can keep the mind like pure empty space, by emptying one's mind, free from every delusion and disturbance, there would be no room for the cycle of birth and death, no room for the cycle of a cyclic existence, becoming into this state and dying from that state and the suffering that goes along with that. Kind of like how if you go out to the bar, you go to get wasted, you go to party, you have a great time, right? And the ideal for that situation is that you go to the bar, you drink alcohol, you have a lot of fun, you have a lot of pleasure, right? And then you go to sleep. But then so you want to become into that state of this party, happy, kind of like pleasurable experience. But what goes along with that becoming is sickness, old age, and death. Right now you got a hangover. Now you're tired. Now you're sick. And that state has to end. So there's a certain kind of suffering that goes with it's a great kind of suffering and a great kind of striving and struggling and always to become, because whatever you become is going to be subject to sickness, old age, and death. If one can keep the mind like pure empty space, by emptying one's mind, free from every delusion and disturbance, there would be no room for the cycle of birth and death, no room for either wisdom or enlightenment, no room for good or bad, no room for bad karmic actions arising from grasping. We can notice any tension, the body has any tension, or any quality of trying to figure out or to solve or get a hold of these teachings. Any noticing of that, allow a release of that to follow up. Can sit together for a few moments in that releasing. Maybe in this space, if there's anyone who we felt any conflict with, or any animosity towards, or any kind of judgment towards in these recent days, these recent moments, we can send them a little bit of this energy of release and forgiveness, and maybe something or someone that we didn't understand why they were that way, or why things turned out like that. Maybe why we haven't been able to get in contact with them, or anything along those lines, and just send them some of that release, that forgiveness, that openness, that spaciousness, in which there's no room for judgment, no room for kind of figuring out, but just sharing out that spaciousness to any person, any situation that we've had some difficulty with in these recent moments. Share out that release. And not with any tension or struggle, because if that tension or that force, that struggle is there, that's not really offering that release. So it's kind of the release of offering release to that person, place, situation, experience, whatever it may be. And oftentimes when there is this person or situation or experience, it leads to this kind of blockage or tangled upness of reactionary thoughts, or even our own judgment, our own figuring out, kind of because we're kind of trying to fight with something or prove something. And in this offering of release on that pathway from, that person's direction, that place's direction, that situation's direction, allow all of that blockage, all of that twisted up, complicated thought to kind of relieve itself, release itself. And it really should be enjoyable, should be pleasant, kind of freeing, releasing. The Buddha teaches us to train our mind in such a way where what we hear is just what is heard. What is thought is just what is thought. What is felt is just what is felt. So even though there may be thoughts coming up, or feelings in the body coming up, or sounds that are there, not to take those as a blockage, but more as a expression of thusness, or just isness. And it kind of facilitates that releasing, and give a little bit of energy to it, to make sure that as much releasing can be done in those mental pathways where there was any grasping onto a judgment, a situation, a person, an experience, can kind of offer some resolution. Okay, let's continue with the teachings. If one can keep the mind like pure empty space, by emptying one's mind, free from every delusion and disturbance, there would be no room for the cycle of birth and death, no room for either wisdom or enlightenment, no, no room for good or bad, no room for bad karmic actions arising from grasping. If one can maintain purity from the top of the head to the bottom of the soles of the feet, then one would not be dragged around by a sluggish life. One would not be hampered or discouraged by birth and death. One would not even be obsessed with thoughts about the Buddha and the enlightenments. Moreover, one would be able to embrace the whole universe or enter into a tiny particle of dust and see no difference between Buddha and an ordinary being. There would be no differentiation between small and large, no differentiation between round and square, no differentiation between light and dark, free from any restriction and manipulation. Whoever strives to seek the sublime teaching should always reflect upon oneself without even the thought of seeking truth. Then, all of a sudden, one will realize the original self-nature in the perfect voidness of truth as it really is, where nothing is lacking or exceeding. It is like an illumination of countless lights of the sun and the moon, reaching the 10 directions of the universe, or the furious sounds of the storms of the sea, without any designed or intentional efforts. All things are natural, yet they are too close to our everyday lives for us to see and realize them. Whosoever aspires to seek the sublime truth should delve deep into one's self-nature with all one's heart without negligence. When one's effort ripens, the true nature of things will reveal as one hardly raised the bow when the arrow pierced the rock. And Zen Master Gyeongheo also says, it is like a mosquito is trying to bite the back of an iron bull, yet plunging right into the animal with its whole body. These fabulous stories should be the guidelines for Hua-du meditation practitioners. And the Hua-du is kind of like the koan or the Hua-to, these puzzling or baffling questions or statements used by Son masters or Zen Buddhist masters to provoke their disciples to renounce rational methods for achieving ultimate enlightenment. And this is a very Zen perspective, but it's not, people oftentimes misunderstand Zen as being a kind of sectarian school, but this is also oftentimes how the Buddha taught, to kind of break the usual rationale of how people were viewing life, to point out their true nature, to point out the truth, so they will awaken. Let us examine the daily life of a bodhisattva. There is nothing to be found in the empty mind, yet they are full of generous charities. In the empty roots of 6 senses, and such purity without defilement is the precept. such tender emptiness, tolerance, such innate brightness without dark shadow is exertion, and such bright serenity the meditation. Cutting off ignorance is none other than to observe clearly the emptiness of things, without disturbance of the mind of discriminating forms. Wisdom without obstacle is to follow the course of nature, about which Bodhidharma says, so long as the mind is concerned, truth governs the action. Hence, what one needs is to take good care of the root, without complaining of the state of the leaves and the branches. So too is enlightenment. If one wishes to attain Buddhahood, one should not worry about not having supernatural powers or serenity. People these days do not practice meditation as true sages and practitioners should. The result is a woman of ignorance and lack of insight, whose sheep are wandering at the junction of the road. She is also like a dreaming and drunken woman. What a pity and a waste of time it is. To quote Chan Master Dongshan, the most miserable woman is the one who is wearing a false Dharma robe. If one heads in the wrong direction at the start of a long journey, there is no meaning no matter how far one gets. The farther one gets, the farther one would be from one's destination. Chan Master Gui Fang offered this admonition: we must ascertain our resolution and manner before starting our practice. It requires many steps and preparations in addition to great effort to build even a small cottage. Imagine then the construction of a great enlightenment hall. Without the proper steps and preparations, no success will be guaranteed. Even in the smallest project, do not hesitate to ask if you do not know the right way. If someone does not have the right answer for the success of your enterprise, ask another. I saw few people who are careful in their preparation for the study of sublime truth. It is truly deplorable to see such people. If one wishes to study the impermanence of things, to attain complete enlightenment, one should at once set out to find a great master. So we have about 5 minutes left. If anyone would like to ask a question or share anything they got from the reading, you're welcome to do so. I will say a bit about this notion of finding like a master or a true teacher. I don't know if it was easier in the olden days because of the way that the society was. I also think there's some affect or some aspect of a kind of a Western society or European society versus a more Asiatic society. But when the masters talk about the importance of finding a teacher, from my perspective, it's very much along the line of how I view things, that you need to become very serious about your path. And you need to become very serious about your path in such a way where your own understanding becomes secondary. Your own desire becomes secondary. Your own fear becomes secondary to the community of practice, right? The work of the community, to the teachings and instructions that are given to you. And when we have the opportunity to connect with a teacher, um, it's a real blessing. I have to tell you, as many people know, I really had very serious mental health struggles before I found Buddhism and before I found meditation. And the really the fundamental, the essential supporting ingredient in my development was being in community, being with community, being a part of a community, and also having uh, relationships, having experiences with realized teachers, taking refuge in realized teachers. So don't think that these words or these advisements of the masters about the importance of finding a master are said lightly, or that they are deceiving you. These kinds of teachers, they don't say things lightly. And certainly from my experience, I don't say that lightly, because if I took out my experience being in community, which I never really had much experience with at all before um, stepping into the world of spirituality and meditation, but also the direct relationships with masters that I've had, I just can't see my spiritual path being kind of the road laid out, and the light on the road laid out so clearly. So it's definitely very important. But the thing is that it doesn't work to call it in. It doesn't work to call it in. You The showing up there is, you'll have to see how it goes, right? You go to meet a teacher in person, or you go to a meditation retreat, you go to visit a Buddhist temple or something. Um, how it goes there is you'll just have to see. But the sacrifice, the seriousness it takes to say, I'm not going to buy a cheeseburger, I'm not going shopping, I'm not getting on Netflix, I'm going to join a meditation retreat, or I'm going to go on pilgrimage in my local area to see if there is a Buddhist master at a temple near me, or something like that, right? That's the special ingredient. And I think the more that people do that, um, the more they will have success. Okay, no questions. Thank you, dear Sangha, for joining me. I hope this talk was beneficial and as meaningful for you as it was for me, because it was definitely quite a treat. Um, let's finish with paying homage to the Buddha, taking refuge in the Buddha, the Dhamma, the Sangha, and we'll finish off with the sharing of the merit. Okay. Namo Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo Tassa Bhagavato Arahato Samma Sambuddhassa. Namo tassa bhagavato arahato samma sambuddhassa. Buddham saranam gacchami. Dhammam saranam gacchami. Sangham saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami. Dutiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi Buddham saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi Dhammam saranam gacchami. Tatiyampi Sangham saranam gacchami. Namo Amitabhul, Namo Kanzeon Bosal. As we share the merit, welcome to repeat after me. May all the merits that we have made until this moment be dedicated and shared out towards all beings, so that they may untangle many knots, so that they may be at peace within themselves. May all beings receive and rejoice in these merits. May it be, may it be. Sadhu, sadhu, sadhu. Thank you, Sangha.